The message today was prepared by one of the pastors of the LCA, and we pray God's blessing now as we reflect on the gospel message for today, which was Luke 13, 10 to 17. Jesus today attempts a miracle healing. Why do I use the word attempts? Sadly, the healing was not successful. What do I mean by this? Rightly so, you may be surprised by this comment, because in fact we do see a woman who'd been bent over for 18 years released from her condition by Jesus. But when we look more closely and deeply into the passage, we see that this may not have been the target of Jesus' teaching. Jesus used this healing to teach us something. Sorry, I lost my place. This woman had been suffering for 18 years. She had not asked for healing, and yet Jesus calls her over and says, "Dear woman, you are healed of your sickness." However, the true healing that Jesus seems to be initiating is with the synagogue leader, who has been bound not by a physical but a spiritual sickness. The synagogue leader was teaching what he had learnt about the Sabbath law to the people in the synagogue. He was angry at the healing occurring on the Sabbath. There are 6 days to do work. Come on one of these to be healed, not on the Sabbath. There are 6 days that this woman could have been healed, but Jesus chose the Sabbath because he knew that the synagogue leader had forgotten his duty to care for those in need. He prioritised the law over compassion. Jesus' healing revealed the true state of the synagogue leader's heart, a sick heart, in that instead of rejoicing that this woman is now free from this crippling disease, he instead referred to the letter of the law, which in turn took precedence over her well-being. This message is a challenge to us to see if we may have neglected the care of others among us because we have been sidetracked by other things. Each Sunday, all sorts of burdens are carried into our churches. And as John mentioned, he loves to come on Sunday because he feels that his burdens can be released. Some, like the bent-over woman's condition, are more obvious than others, such as sickness or sadness. But other conditions may not be so obvious. What might some of these be? Okay, I'm going to see if you're awake. What might they be? Mental, yeah? Anyone think of other things? Feeling of guilt, yes. That's not always obvious. Loneliness. I've just listed a few here that may not always be as obvious. We often try to hide things too. We're sometimes good at hiding these things, and it just needs a gentle conversation that sometimes can help us bring some of these issues out. And I guess that's where the challenge lies, in how we can be more discerning and caring and ensure that all who come to worship can leave knowing someone cares about them. As a congregation, we are trying hard to work on this, to be welcoming and caring, but there's always more that we can do. The difference between the bent-over woman and the leader of the synagogue was that the woman went away healed, while the synagogue leader still had his sick heart that needed healing. We see a similar attitude in the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector, which I'm sure you're all fairly familiar with. The Pharisee thanked God that he wasn't like the tax collector standing over there, that he obeyed the law, whereas the tax collector stood with a bent head, asking God for his forgiveness. So the righteous, law-abiding Pharisee went away without being right before God, despite his obedience to the law, while the sinful but repentant tax collector went away right before God. Jesus wanted the Pharisee to understand that the things we say are not as important as the conditions of the heart. This healing was a problem for the synagogue ruler because of when it happened. Come back another day when it's all right for healings to be performed. Wait a little longer. After all, what is one extra day in an 18-year-long suffering? For Jesus, it is one day too long, as well as for the woman. But for the synagogue leader, it was the wrong day. The tension here is between two faithful Jewish men, Jesus and the synagogue ruler, who are struggling with each other concerning what it means to be faithful to God. Both men believe they are keeping the true meaning of the Sabbath. The story portrays Jesus as keeping the Sabbath because he sees it differently, because he has a different sense of timing and in his attitude towards people, particularly the sick and the vulnerable. The timing for God's grace and healing is now, not later or another day. Often when we think of Pharisees and other religious leaders in the New Testament times, we think of them in negative terms: judgmental, close-minded, harsh, moralistic, religious fanatics. However, we must think about the fact that the religious leaders actually were trying to be faithful to God, but didn't quite get it right. Somehow these leaders thought that the way to please God was through religious obedience, worship services, impressive temples, long prayers and fasting, focusing their attention on the law, right down to every technical detail. If we were to ask society today what they think about Christians, they would probably say that they see many Christians in the same way, as hypocrites. Jesus tells us that what matters most is what's in the heart and how we treat one another, and especially how we treat those in our midst who are most vulnerable. The story of the Good Samaritan, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, highlights the importance of recognising a need and acting on it. We remember that the priest and the Levite, what did they do? They ignored the needs of the man and walked past because they wanted to remain ritually clean for their temple duties. So while they were religiously right, in their love for their neighbour they were wrong. These religious leaders focused on pleasing God by obeying all the laws, which we as humans can't keep anyway. However, they couldn't see the human suffering of their community. Are we a little like this and don't always get it right? As Christians, we certainly want to serve God and show our love and devotion to him. But do we let our devotion sometimes get in the way that we don't notice what God places in our midst, who also needs our love and devotion? If we go back to the Old Testament, we see that God was demanding a strict obedience to the law of Moses, and threats of being put to death for disobedience. So what has changed? The change is that God sees his son Jesus to fulfill the law that we couldn't fulfill under the old covenant, and he introduced a new covenant. And as Anne read in the reading today in the Hebrews, he compares the old and the new covenant. The characteristics under the Old Covenant of Moses included strict obedience and fear. In the Hebrew reading, we heard about the mountain that couldn't be touched, a flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and a whirlwind. There was the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the heavens beg God to stop speaking, the hearers. If even an animal touches the mountain, it shall be stoned to death. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But if we think about the new covenant, a new mountain, Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the innumerable angels in festal gathering. With Jesus came grace, love, and freedom. The new law became love God first and then your neighbour. And if we truly love God first in our love, we will also be automatically wanting to love our neighbour. It's very easy to slip back into some of our traditions and put some of our practices ahead of the needs of people by further burdening them. There are 6 days to work. Come back on one of those days to receive God's grace. That doesn't mean the law isn't important, but Jesus interpreted the true meaning of the law in loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbour as ourselves. The religious leader, in his eagerness to show his love to God, was like the priest and the Levite on their way to the temple. They neglected to love their neighbour. And in the good story of the Good Samaritan, it was the unsuspecting, the Gentile, who showed mercy. The religious leader was called a hypocrite by Jesus because he allowed his members to care for their animals on the Sabbath, but ignored the needs of a human being created in the image of God. Do we sometimes care more about things in the church while ignoring the needs of the fellow human beings created in God's image? Whether it's our worship, whether it's our work, whether it's our sport or special interests and things we stand up for, caring for human life should guide our values and our decisions. It's so easy to let our political, our theological agenda or personal agenda guide our values and decisions, which doesn't always take into account the well-being of others. It comes too easy to be critical of others and their situations. I guess sometimes we think about the situation at the moment, with the housing shortage. How come all of a sudden people are homeless? Why are migrants taking all the jobs of Australians and taking the housing? Or consider the illegal immigrant issue, which is, well, we read more about it in the States, but sometimes people can think, send them home, not realising the situations that they've come from. Issues like these and others can reveal the true state of our hearts despite all our exterior obedience. It's so easy to put rules first and people second. That's where the synagogue leader got it wrong. As Christians, we've been set the task to value all human life because we know and believe that all human life is created in the image of God. When we begin with that foundation, that all human life is created in God's image, then everything we do will take that into consideration. There are times when our Christian beliefs will be challenged to make the right decision. But when we act out love for God and our neighbour as Jesus did, then we allow the heart of God to guide us and his grace to forgive us when we might fail at times. Jesus saw the Sabbath day as a day for God to free us from the weight of the world that keeps us bent over. Today's message invites us to ponder the ways in which our own rules, customs and habits of what is right and proper have in fact become burdens on those seeking release. As Jesus once said, the Sabbath was made for humans. Humans were not made for the Sabbath. So let Sunday free us, but more importantly, help us to free others from their burdens. We pray for God's guidance and a loving heart to make us more aware of the needs of those around us. Our prayers should be that we too can show your love, grace, peace, and the hope of salvation, both physically and spiritually, to others. May God bless us as we seek to do his will. Amen.